Okay, so pop quiz. What is the best part about any woodworking project? If you said anything but sanding, then congratulations. You are officially a woodworker. Because sanding really is kind of the worst. But today I have 3.5 tips that take sanding from being the worst part of your project to, still the worst, but a lot better, I promise. And we're gonna get our science on today, so that should be fun. Because not only are these tips gonna be good for your projects, but they're gonna be good for your efficiency, your health, and your wallet. Hi, I'm Daniel, and I like to make things out of wood. I also like to make videos for beginner to intermediate woodworkers. The videos are generally focused on tips, tools, and builds. And I do it all from my less than 200 square foot shop. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you can see more. All right, let's get into the video. Now, there are about as many different types of sanders as there are ways for me to lose my fantasy football matchup every week. And unfortunately, that is a lot. And the two most common types of sanders are going to be these: the quarter sheet orbital sander and the 5-inch random orbital sander. But which one should you choose? Let's take a look at them both to see which one you should be using. Both of these sanders are orbital in nature, which means that the motors move their bases in a very compact circular pattern. But the random orbital sander has an additional trick up its sleeve. Its base also rotates, but not in a circular motion. It's more elliptical, which makes the sanding pattern more random, hence the random orbital sander name. Now, what this movement pattern does is it makes the random orbital sander a bit more aggressive and provides better coverage of the sanding area, which leads to a less likely chance of leaving undesirable swirls or scratches when sanding. The random orbital also has a Velcro base, which makes changing sandpaper really easy. It also makes it easy to attach other things like a white and maroon pad to use for finishing. Changing sandpaper on the quarter sheet sander, however, is a bit more of a peter. Plus, you have to poke your own holes for dust collection. But the quarter sheet sander does have some advantages. Its shape allows it to more easily fit into corners for sanding, and its less aggressive movement pattern could be beneficial for sanding more delicate items like veneers. Now, these comparisons are nice on paper and all, but I wanted to see how they actually stacked up. So I decided to do some science and run a few tests. And for this test, I have the same brand sander, the same brand paper with the same grit, the same size piece of maple, fresh off the plane. I scribbled pencil marks on each board and sanded until they were gone. And in my first test, the random orbital was about 56% faster at removing pencil marks than the quarter sheet was. The quarter sheet also left more dust behind. That's probably due to the fact that the holes were just so small in the sandpaper. But as far as dust is concerned, we'll get into that a little bit more later. So when I said we were going to talk about dust extraction later, I meant now. We're going to talk about it right now. Because if you don't currently use dust collection while you're sanding, you'd be surprised at the difference it makes. And I'm going to show you the comparison of sanding both with and without dust extraction here in a minute. But sanding without dust extraction hurts you in 3 ways. 1, it's less efficient. Or in other words, it just takes longer. When you sand without evacuating the dust still has to go somewhere. It doesn't just disappear like my fantasy football team's chances after week 8. I'm not bitter. I'm not. It can get trapped in the sandpaper itself, effectively neutering the grit on the paper. Or it can stay on the wood surface, which has the same effect as being trapped in the sandpaper, in that the dust basically is forming a barrier between the wood and your sandpaper, again, making it less effective. 2, it's less safe. Another place that the dust goes when it's not extracted is into the air, exposing you to more potentially harmful particles to breathe in than you need to be. And 3, it's less cost effective, because when the excess dust is trapped in the sandpaper and on the workpiece, not only does the paper have to work longer to get the sanding job done, but the extra heat from the extra friction caused by the extra dust causes the sandpaper to dull prematurely, which is a double whammy on efficiency. And you might be thinking that you have to have money falling from the sky to be able to afford a dust extractor, because most of the model brands that you see here on YouTube typically start with a fess and end with a tool. But Drew Witt over at Woodworks did a video a while back showing that outside of the creature comforts, there was effectively no difference between the Festool setup and the rigid setup, which is also what I happen to have, and I can attest that it works great. But as far as testing the impact of dust collection, again, I use the same sander and the same paper with new sheets each time, with the same size wood fresh off the planer each time. And the two finished in relatively the same amount of time with only a 6-second difference between the two, with the one that wasn't hooked up to dust collection actually being faster. That amount of time difference is probably within the margin of error, but that's not the complete story. To test dust extraction's effect on longevity of the sandpaper, I simply repeated the test without changing the paper, thinking that there would be more of a separation between the two the second time around as the paper without dust extraction starts to dull faster. And that certainly seemed to be the case, as the sander with dust extraction went from being 6 seconds slower the first time to 53 seconds faster the second time, which, to be honest, I was not expecting to see that level of performance drop off. But even though we're using identical sandpaper, it's not the best stuff out there. But then that begs the question, what happens if we use better sandpaper? So we see how big of an impact having the right sander and dust extraction can make on improving your sanding. But the last tip before we get into the bonus is probably the easiest one to implement today. And it's one that I think a lot of hobbyist woodworkers, myself included, tend to overlook. And that is just how much of a difference a good quality sandpaper makes. I used to buy basically the cheapest sandpaper I could find, and I actually still have some of it in my shop to this day. It's what we've been using for the testing up until now. But in this part of our testing, we're going to see just how much of a difference better sandpaper makes. And the two sandpapers we're going to use are this Duragold brand paper that I got off of Amazon and the 3M extract paper that I also got off of Amazon. The parameters will be the same as the previous test, with both sanders hooked up to dust collection. Now, the results of this round were both predictable and surprising at the same time. I knew the 3M paper performed better because I've used both of them, but I never knew just how much better it was until this test. The 3M was a whopping 31% faster than the Duragold paper. And when I did a second run, without changing the paper to compare longevity, the 3M increased from being 31% faster to now being 40% faster. And this is somewhat anecdotal because the 3M paper is a mesh back paper and the Duragold is not, but I didn't really notice the difference in dust collection. Now, obviously the 3M paper is better, but it also costs more. So the real question is, from a value perspective, is it actually worth it? And based on my experience, I say yes. But if you want to see the 3M paper compared to a lot of other brands, check out Jonathan Katz-Moses' video that he did a while back. Oh, and he uses robots, so, that's awesome. But if you don't want to check it out, then spoiler alert, his science and robots concluded that the 3M paper was the best. And it kind of dominated the competition on a cost per grams removed basis. So whether you're looking at it from a robots and laboratory perspective or a real world dude in his garage perspective, upgrading your sandpaper can pay huge dividends. And more specifically, this 3M paper appears to be absolutely the real deal. Now, those 3 tips can make sanding, not terrible. But this bonus tip can take sanding from something that you endure to something that you maybe actually kind of, in a way, enjoy. And no, it's not buying a Festool, but it is making the jump from a 5-inch sander to a 6-inch sander. This is my Bosch 6-inch sander, and I've had it for, I think, a few years now. And it may not sound like much to go from 5 to 6 inches, but believe me, the extra inch makes a world of difference. Because if you remember from math class how to calculate the area of a circle, which I did not, I had to look it up. But it turns out that going from a 5-inch radius sander to a 6-inch radius sander, that results in an area that is 44% greater. And what were the results when I tested the 5-inch against the 6-inch? Both with the same paper, I might add, just different size discs. The 6-inch Bosch finished 40% faster, which makes sense given the 44% bigger area that I just mentioned. But this Bosch sander in particular has another cool party trick, and that's its turbo mode. And in turbo mode, the sander is more aggressive and removes material more quickly. And when I tested it in turbo mode, the sanding time fell by another 34% from the regular mode. So if you're keeping track at home, we reduced our sanding time on our test board from 3 minutes and 58 seconds with the quarter sheet sander all the way down to 31 seconds when implementing all of the tips. But what if you're not in a position to implement all the tips right now? Well, I have good news for you, because each of these tips acts independently of each other. Meaning, if you're only able to do one or two of them, you're still going to see pretty good improvements. So even if you're not able to do them all this year, you know what they say, there's always next year. Which also happens to be the name of my fantasy football team.